Technology hasn't changed human nature. Technology is great, but let's say the internet, mid-90s, now it's 2019, let's call it 22 years. Human nature has been evolving for thousands of years. How long have human beings walked the earth? I don't know my history that well. What I do know is that 20 years of the internet didn't change human nature. So what happens, I think, is we go online to try and, even if we say, well, can I trust this person from some online research? I think the answer to that question is no. Trust is an emotion. It's a visceral response that people have. And I think it's important to understand that there's a distinction between being trusted and actually being trustworthy. The challenge is, of course, if you're a really good con person, what a con man basically does is get people to trust him or her who shouldn't trust them, but they're really good at it. And I think what's frustrating for wholesalers, for leaders, for advisors is to be trustworthy and not be trusted. And in particular, to be trustworthy, not be trusted, and watch people do business with less trustworthy advisors. That's very frustrating. That's why everything we do really focuses on those communication skills to create that emotional connection, which is the feeling of trust.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, where we look into the many facets of the job, the career, and the lifestyle of investment and insurance product wholesaling. I'm your host, the creator of the Awesome Wholesaler Experience, and yours truly, Awesome Mike. Hey, everyone, we have yet another special guest on the show today, and this fellow in our pre-call has just been quite a treat, quite a delight. So without further ado, let me read his official credentials. On the show today, we have Mr. Bert Freeman Bachrach, and Bert's an American composer, songwriter, oh, wait a minute. Wait, I'm sorry. My producer was telling me that we don't have Bert Bachrach on. We actually have Bill Bachrach on. Sorry about that, Bill. I'm sure you've gotten confused with Bert on a couple of occasions. But let me continue. Bill Bachrach, as many of you on the show know, he has been an icon, really a legendary figure in the financial services industry for over a quarter of a century. Now, he is the most popular resource in the world for successful financial advisors who seek to be in the top 1% of the profession in terms of value that they deliver for their clients, business success, and the most important one, maybe, their personal quality of life. Bill's books are industry bestsellers, and his articles appear in the most prestigious financial service publications around the world. He has delivered more than 1,500 presentations worldwide for almost every major financial service firm and association, including 11 times being at the FPA's National Convention, 5 times for the Million Dollar Roundtable, 4 times at the top of that Million Dollar Roundtable conference. And then he's also keynoted many of the major industry international conferences that are in the who's who of conferences. Now, Bill is a member of not one but 2 halls of fame. First one is the Financial Planning Magazine's Hall of Fame as one of our industry's most influential people, and then the National Speaker Association's Speaker Hall of Fame for a career of speaking excellence. On a personal note, Bill is a legit badass, folks. He has completed the Hawaii Ironman Triathlon, the 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and 26.2-mile marathon run is considered to be the toughest single-day athletic event in the world. Now, Bill uses this and his other unique life experiences to inspire his audiences. Side note, Bill has 2 very creative designations. The first one is CSP, that stands for Certified Sales Professional. And the second one, which is my personal favorite, is the CPAE. And that stands for, well, it's in Latin, so forgive my butchering the Latin language, but it stands for, and you can help me out with this, Bill, Coninuare Professus Articulatus Excelere, which really in English stands for the Council of Peers Award of Excellence. That has been given to less than 1% of the professional speaking community. So congratulations for earning that, and welcome to the show, Bill. How are you today, sir?
Hey, I'm great. Awesome, Mike. Thanks very much for that awesome introduction. I appreciate the reference to Bert Bachrach. I am not related to Bert, but I'm looking forward to someday meeting him. I already know what I'm going to ask him. I'm going to say, so Bert, have you spent your whole life telling people you're not related to me?
Yeah, that is absolutely hilarious. And I was going to ask you a follow-on question. I was going to ask you, how was it to be married to Angie Dickinson?
Yeah, well, it was short-lived. She was amazing, but, it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, she was. I mean, she was a legit, powerhouse superstar back then, and that
Yeah.
guy has quite a career. Not to be disparaging towards your own career, though. You've done some terrific things for the industry, and I want to ask you, how in the world does a super stoked surfer dude from San Diego end up a snow ski fanatic?
Yeah, I was a skier before I was a surfer. So I lived in New Mexico. I'm a military brat. You and I were talking about this before the show today, and I was thanking you for your service. You had a unique and important career in the Army, and we appreciate that. I grew up on military bases. My dad was in the Air Force, and so I was living in New Mexico at the time, where I learned how to snow ski Sandia Peak in Albuquerque. If
Wow.
any of your viewers are familiar with that little ski mountain, that's where I learned how to ski. And so I skied all over the West. Actually, I was skiing before I learned how to surf. So skiing came first, and then surfing. Don't do much surfing today, but I still ski a lot. I was just skiing earlier this week at my favorite mountain, Elton Snowbird in Utah. So big skier, passionate about skiing.
Yeah, that's cool. And it seems like you tend to run the gauntlet in any kind of a sport. Like surfing is probably on the other end of the pole than skiing is. You did the triathlon, which incorporates the water, the bike, and the run. Do you find that you tend to do that with everything that you do is to cover the entire gamut of it, or are you more of a silver bullet kind of guy and go for one thing?
Yeah, I've never been a great athlete. So my Ironman experience was especially interesting because my last organized athletics was eighth grade baseball. So I wasn't a swimmer in high school or college. I wasn't on the cross country team. So I've always been active, but I've never been a great athlete. So to go from being a twice a week jogger to finishing the Hawaii Ironman in less than a year was not only a huge personal accomplishment, but I think it's a great metaphor for most of us are capable, if not all of us, we have this untapped potential. And that's one of the things I love to talk to advisors about is really tapping your true potential, creating a vision of your ideal life, and then building a business that aligns with your vision of your ideal life. And chances are, I get this feedback a lot. Well, Bill, ideal. I mean, is ideal really attainable? Ideal is like perfection, and nobody can be perfect. And that may be true. I have a friend who says, strive for perfection, settle for excellence. And so why not create a vision, whether you're a wholesaler or a leader or a financial advisor, why not sort of test yourself by going for something big? And even if you fall short of something big, I like to say falling short of a big goal is better than achieving a small goal, because either way you end up with a better result or outcome. So most of these things, for whatever reason in my head, I end up seeing them or discovering that they're metaphors for life and for business.
That's a very unique vision that you have. If you can do that, what you described there by doing that in 1 year. That's what I've heard it called massive action. And you
Mm.
had to take some massive action to accomplish that goal. Do you think that a financial advisor should do that, or are they better served to do the 1%, incremental improvement?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. One of the things that I discovered is that focus is a learned skill. I talk to a lot of advisors and wholesalers and leaders, and there are just so many limiting beliefs. Well, I can't do this. I tend to be disorganized. I tend to, have a difficult time focusing. And I appreciate that there are sort of clinical things like ADD and ADHD, but most of us are able to learn how to focus. So what about the idea of combining what you just said? What about sort of you can incrementally improve, but you can also simultaneously be taking, massive focused action as well as incrementally improve. So I think the key thing is to really figure out, we've been fortunate to train a lot of very successful financial advisors, and what they have some patterns. So in one of my keynote speeches, it's called The Roadmap to Success. And I sort of borrowed this, one of my favorite books, the most influential book perhaps on my young career in the 80s was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Dr. Stephen Covey. And so the Roadmap to Success identifies 7 habits or success patterns of the top advisors. And one of them is to have a very clear vision of what they want. And then that drives them, whether it's massive action or incremental growth, that drives them to focus on the high payoff activities every single day.
You have your 6 questions to kind of identify and crystallize that vision. Can you go over those with us? And the ones I'm talking about is, what does your ideal life look like?
Yeah.
What does it sound like, feel like? That's very intuitive.
Yeah, that's one of the sort of habits, if you will, or patterns of the successful advisors on the roadmap to success. And these same things, I know you have more wholesalers who watch this show than financial advisors. The same principles apply. So the idea is, first you want to create a vision for your ideal life. And the idea is to build a business that supports you having your ideal life. And unfortunately, I've met a lot of top advisors over the years. And it started for me from being a financial advisor who was successful. And then I got to sit next to all these advisors at the company conferences. So typically what they'll do is they'll take the keynote speaker, they put him at the head table at lunch or dinner, and then as sort of a reward to the top advisors, they invite the top advisors to sit at that same table. So it's usually the execs and the top advisor. And I can't tell you how many top advisors have said to me something like, and sort of whisper it to me, I know I'm the #1 producer at this firm, but my life sucks.
Oh, no kidding.
And what I really want to tell people is I want to say, hey, don't do what I did, right? So yes, you want to be successful, but you want to be successful in a way that really creates your best life. You don't want to sacrifice your best life to be successful. And so this concept of the ideal life, I think, was born from some of these private conversations where sort of like, don't quote me on this, but yeah, I'm a big producer, but you wouldn't want my quality of life. So how can you blend those two things to have a business that creates the life you want, whether you're an advisor, a wholesaler, or a leader? So I just developed the 6 ideal life questions. And so we can go through those. I think we can go through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, let's do that.
The first question is, what does your ideal life look like? And so we all tend to, when you think in your head, pictures come up in your head, right? So when I think about my ideal life, I get pictures in my head. I get pictures of the people that I'm with. I get pictures of the things that I'm doing. And so part of my ideal life, for example, I live in San Diego, and I don't like to dress up very often. So I wear a suit when I deliver a keynote speech, but I'm really happy that you sort of allowed me to have a relaxed dress code here today. So I've actually have dressed up. I have a shirt with a collar. So in my ideal life, most days, I'm wearing a t-shirt, not even a shirt with a collar. And of course I put on a suit when I deliver a keynote speech. So what does it look like? And then the second question is, what does your ideal life sound like? And I get a lot of questions about that one. People go, oh, I know exactly what it looks like. And they go, well, Bill, what do you mean sounds like? And I say, well, for example, close your eyes for a moment. And when you're living your ideal life, what are the sounds that really make you smile? Maybe it's the sound of your kids or your grandkids laughing. Maybe it's the sound of, if you are an ocean person, you can hear the seagulls, you can hear the waves crashing on the beach. For me, I'm an avid skier, as we talked about. So when you're skiing in deep powder, there's a sound that the powder makes as it sort of blows up past your face. You can feel that powder hitting your face and your goggles. It wouldn't be the sound of edges on ice. So if you're a skier, you don't want to hear that sound. You live in Michigan, so you probably hear that a lot. That's not ideal skiing, not ideal life. If you're a golfer, it could be the sound of, the sound that the club face makes when it hits the ball right at the sweet spot, right? And the other 3 people in your foursome go, nice shot. I mean, those are ideal life sounds. And then what does it feel like? So what you see and what you hear creates a certain, as I'm describing, I'm literally closing my eyes, thinking about snow skiing in deep powder, and surfer term, you feel stoked. So what are the feelings? What does your ideal life feel like? And then the fourth question is, what are you doing? So when you're living your ideal life, what are you doing? And then the fifth question is, who are you with? So chances are when you're living your ideal life, there are people in your life that make you smile, that make you happy. I mean, one of the best things you can do to move your ideal life forward is to disengage from a few particular people. And chances are, if I say, well, just think for a moment, who are the people in your life that bring you stress and frustration and irritation? So I always encourage financial advisors to, and I will talk about wholesalers also, but I encourage financial advisors, you've got one client at least, no matter how much they pay you, that your life would be better off if they were no longer in it. And if you've never fired a client, you're missing one of the finest feelings this business has to offer. And if you're a wholesaler, it's the same thing. You've got some advisor who they might be delivering a lot of revenue, but I call it the pain in the butt to revenue ratio, right? And so no matter how much revenue they generate, if the pain in the butt factor is way up here, no matter how high the revenue is, maybe there are some relationships that should be unplugged from. And then the last question is, who are you being? So when you're living your ideal life, who you're being. And so that also gets a lot of questions. What do you mean being? Well, it could be just you're being happy. But like for me, when I'm living my ideal life, I'm being philanthropic. So for me, service is really important. And so I want to help. I want to serve. So my wife and I have been charitable throughout our lives, but we tend to give more money than we do time. And so I know charities want your money, but there's something when you actually put the time in, the time feels even better. You're right there in the moment to actually, go to some kind of a feed the homeless and just actually hand them food and have them look you in the eye and say, thank you. I mean, that's, who are you being? Those are the 6 ideal life questions. So answer those questions. Hopefully you wrote those down. Take an hour or 2 and really think through that. And that's a really good exercise from which to make better decisions.
Yeah, I can affirm and a couple of those points. First one is, who are you with? And firing an advisor for a wholesaler is one of the most terrifying yet liberating events that I've experienced. And the language that I used, the person was embarrassing me in front of an entire crowd. And he even said, well, if I were you, I'd take that out of my presentation next time, a comment that I'd made. And I simply just said, well, how about I just take you out of my presentation next time? And it was quite liberating. And then we got to make sure that we don't remove the compliance department, because we still need to make sure that we're, checking our P's and Q's. But who you're being, and that charitable, call it self-nurturing, is remarkable too. I delivered some Thanksgiving Day meals to some homeless veterans that I had gotten their names from the VFW and from a local church. And just the look in their eyes, they didn't have to say thank you or do anything like that. Just the look in their eyes and the feeling like I was doing something that was really worthy, is super important. So I'm with you on that one too. One of the things that kept coming to mind, you've got your program or your content that you call, crossing the relationship bridges, and this idea of having these 2 bridges that you can cross. And I'll let you go over it. But the first point was to visually, how can you make things more visually engaging and impressive? And I think that's what you're doing when you ask yourself those questions. Even in your own mind, you're visualizing, you're using these different senses to really get the impact on that life. But could you tell us about the 2 relationship bridges and how advisors and even wholesalers can cross them and what they will see on the other side?
Yeah, there's no question that there's a clear parallel. So we've done a lot more advisor training than we have done wholesaler training, but we've done quite a bit of wholesaler training because the principles are interchangeable. The one thing I'm going to circle back to and just tie a bow around before we move on to that is you talked about, well, what would compliance have to say if you fired a top advisor? That's usually just a production question. And so what you want to do is make sure, whether you're an advisor or a wholesaler, are you producing enough that you can afford to even fire somebody who brings in a lot of that business? And so that's one of the benefits of being successful. Right? So when you're successful, you can afford to say, look, I'm gonna get rid of this client because I have the skill and the confidence to replace them. Or even if the production goes, ticks down a little bit, if you're the top wholesaler at your company, even if your production ticks down a bit, you're still the top wholesaler. So there's one of the benefits of being successful is you can choose who you do business with. And so I would encourage you to be successful enough that you can always choose who you do business with, because nothing makes you feel, it's a business of service, but you're not supposed to feel like a servant.
Well said.
So the relationship bridges, that's built on, one of the things I'm best known for is the art of building high trust client relationships. So in the 80s, I had an epiphany as I was studying sales training. I remember I looked at one of my sales trainers and I said, when people trust me, I don't need any of the techniques I ever learned in sales training. I don't have to make features and benefits presentations. I don't have to handle objections. I don't have to close. I don't have to do any of that. When people trust me and I give them advice, they say okay. So I realized in that moment I should throw away all the sales training and really become a student of what causes people to trust. And can you do that deliberately? And the analogy that I came up with is everybody has built into their sort of subconscious an imaginary trust dial. And everything you say and do moves the needle on the trust dial one direction or the other, right? And so you can say things that move it in the right direction, and you could be saying things that move it in the wrong direction. And the problem, of course, is wouldn't it be great if that trust dial was like embedded on your forehead and you could look at them and go, oh, well, the needle's moving the wrong way. But unfortunately, it's not as obvious as that. So one of my keynote talks is the art of building high trust client relationships. And we talk about this idea. One of the ideas we talk about is the relationship bridges. And what that simply means is that, and this is not an exact science. Trust is as much of an art as it is a science, right? But I believe from decades of experience, and not only was I a successful financial advisor, but I listened to recordings, thousands of recordings of real financial advisors having real conversations with prospects and clients. And we deconstruct those recordings so we can hear what worked and what didn't work. So you may not be able to pick it up in the moment, but you can definitely hear it in the recording. When you're out of it, you can say, oh, I can hear that's where I lost them, right? This is where they came back. So, gee, I had them at hello, but by the time I asked them to become a client, they sort of went into think it over mode instead of making a commitment mode. I over-explained, I over-educated, I didn't listen well enough, I interrupted them. And you may not realize it at the moment, but there are all these things that add up, and the cumulative effect is, so where does the needle on the trust dial have to be for someone to do business with you? Again, not an exact science, but it's got to be pretty high. So trust is important, especially when it comes to money. So the way I describe it to advisors, and I think the same would apply to wholesalers and leaders, is that it probably has to be at about an 8. So if you say, all right, I want you to become a client, I want you to no longer work with your other advisor or advisors and move everything to me, it's got to be a pretty high level of trust. It's got to be at an 8, let's say, to do any business. And then at a 9 for them to do all of their business. Right?
That's the first bridge, right?
The first bridge is from the 8 to the 9. So the point is that most wholesalers are doing business with advisors, and they're not getting all of that business in their category, but there's no good reason why the advisor is spreading the business around. The advisor could be doing all of their annuity business with you, all of their insurance business with you. They could be doing all of their asset management business with you. So what has to happen? That first relationship bridge is to move them from where they do some business to all of their business. And I always find it interesting how many advisors say, what I really need is I need more clients. And I laugh and say, why? So you can have more people to underserve? And they
The
said,
smile.
well,
At least you put the
that's
smile.
right. I always, you know how that works. And so you're not fully serving your existing clients. If your clients have multiple advisors, you have an opportunity to move from an 8 to a 9. So the first relationship bridge is to deepen the relationship so they move to a 9 and do all their business with you. And then going from a 9 to a 10, I believe they have to be at a 10 to refer you. So if my wife Ann and I are doing business with you as our financial advisor, it's one thing for us to risk our situation. But if I refer you to my neighbor on this side, Ken and Elena, and my neighbors on the other side, Darren and Monica, if I start referring you to my friends and my family, my neighbors, and you screw that up, not only does it mess up my personal financial situation, but now I'm risking my relationships. So people, I get that, well, my clients love me, but they don't refer. So you've got further to go. You've got another relationship bridge to cross. It's on the other side of that bridge where they do refer. So you want to deepen that relationship. Same for wholesalers, same for advisors, same for leaders.
Yeah, I love the concept, and I love the visualization of the two bridges. And one thing you can't do is jump from, an 8 to a 10. It's naive to think that you can. Don't even try. Do the work, earn the right to cross that second bridge. You did have a publication called High Trust Leadership for Wholesalers. And again, it's all about the trust. And I want to ask you about this trust thing. Back in the 80s, late 80s, when you got started in this business, there was no internet. So really you had to kind of, the guy that was representing the company or the product, you really did need to trust them to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. All three of those things. That should not be three things, by the way, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, but now though, Bill, I can Google everything. I can find out. I can look at reviews online. There's no more secrets, especially when it comes to a product. So is trust as important when it comes to, a wholesaler advisor relationship as it used to be?
Well, sure. I mean, technology hasn't changed human nature. So technology is great, but let's say the internet, mid 90s. So now it's 2019. So let's call it, 20, 22 years. So human nature has been evolving for thousands of years. How long have human beings walked the earth? I don't know my history that well. What I do know is that 20 years of the internet didn't change human nature. So what happens, I think, is we go online to try and, even if we say, well, can I trust this person from some online research? And I think the answer to that question is no. So trust is an emotion. It's a visceral response that people have. And I think it's important to understand that there's a distinction between being trusted and actually being trustworthy. And so the challenge is, of course, if you're a really good con person, what a con man basically does is get people to trust him or her who shouldn't trust them, but they're really good at it. And I think what's frustrating for wholesalers, for leaders, for advisors is to be trustworthy and not be trusted. And in particular, to be trustworthy, not be trusted, and watch people do business with less trustworthy advisors. And that's very frustrating. So that's why everything we do really focuses on those communication skills to create that emotional connection, which is the feeling of trust, which is why having face-to-face meetings is still so important. It's much harder to create trust. You and I are on this Zoom meeting here. And I have advisors all the time who ask me, so Bill, can't I do my business long distance through Skype and Zoom and GoToMeeting and WebEx and Google Meet? And I say, well, you can, but what you're doing now in an age of technology, you're giving up one of your most important human benefits. So in a world where what are the benefits between being a human and technology? It's that face-to-face emotional connection. So why would you give that up? Particularly when you think about that, who has all the money? Well, it's people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s who have all the money. You want to use the internet for something? Find out who has all the money. That's just data and facts, right? So it's not a generation. It's not like, oh, millennials versus Gen X versus baby boomers. When I started in the business in the 80s, the people who had all the money were people over 50. It didn't matter what label you put on them. That's just sort of how money in life works. So if most of your clients are going to be over 50 because they have all the money, then you want to take advantage of having face-to-face meetings. So you might do some prospecting on the internet and online, but ultimately you want to have a face-to-face meeting because you have a much higher probability of creating the emotional connection, getting that needle where it needs to be face-to-face than online.
I completely agree with that. There is nothing that will replace the connection when I shake your hand and we're in the same room. There's no hiding there.
Right. I mean, how do we do that?
Yeah, you
How do
can't do it here. I give you like an air 5, but that's about,
right. I
that's about
mean,
it.
what do we do?
Yeah.
And then the other challenge with that I'll also bring up is if you're a financial advisor, and I'm not sure what the wholesaler parallel is, we'll have to think about this for a minute, but let's just take financial advisors for a moment. There are some people or organizations you don't want to compete with. And if I were to become a financial advisor again, I can tell you I don't want to compete with Vanguard. All right, so I might want to have Vanguard participate in helping me manage the money and create the asset allocation, but I don't want to compete with them. And Vanguard is doing a brilliant job. They have something called PAS, which I believe stands for Personal Advisor or Advisory Services. And for 35 basis points, they'll do financial planning and manage your money, right? Well, you don't want to work for 35 basis points. So as soon as you try and be the online financial advisor, you've just moved into Vanguard's territory. And I don't know if you know this, but they have a lot of money. So I sort of envision these giant buildings, in Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia, where Vanguard is headquartered, that look like the Matrix. And they're filled with CFPs, teams of CFPs who are brilliant at using technology to have clients who pay them 35 basis points. So if you look like what Vanguard does and you charge 3 times as much as that I don't want to compete with that. So if I'm going to charge what I really want to charge, one of the advantages is the face-to-face relationship, not the online relationship.
I'll like to take that a little bit further, and it's probably a good time to bring it up. To quote you mentioned that 58% of financial advisors will be replaced by robots and artificial intelligence. And I believe that the phrase robo-advisor is kind of like the first wave of these, call them agents from the Matrix. But I want to ask you in particular, I saw it somewhere, a video where you talked about the robo-advisor and you used the analogy of the drum machine.
Right.
Bill, it was one of your, I can't find it now online. I looked for it a lot. It was one of your best pieces of work. Could you tell us about how the drum machine affected music the same way that the robots could affect financial planning?
Yeah, and I think part of this is I am a wannabe drummer. So I've always, I think most of us humans, I don't know, I can't speak for the rest of humanity, but the whole idea of like being a rock star, right? So going to concerts as a kid and you just look, you go, wow, that looks like so much fun. I can't even imagine a more fun way to make a living than to play an instrument. And for me, it's the drums because I don't really have musical talent, so at least I can fool around on the drums. So I've got an electronic drum kit. I put my headphones on and I pretend that I can actually play. So this actually, I don't usually tell this as part of the story, but the reason this hits near and dear to my heart is I am a drummer who could be replaced by a drum machine. And so the metaphor is in the 70s, they actually came out with a drum machine. And it's essentially a piece of technology that replicates exactly the drum beats, the cymbal strikes. I mean, it's perfect. It's perfect drumming. That's what it does. And so then the question is, well, would the drum machine put all drummers out of business? And the answer is, well, it'll put some drummers out of business, So the question is, which drummers would the drum machine put out of business, or did the drum machine put out of business? And the answer, of course, is, well, drummers who suck. Right? I mean, so, and then and I'll get this video back up. We've been doing some work with we're making our YouTube channel work, and I tell this story a lot. It's really fun, like in a big keynote speech environment. I was just the keynote speaker at a major conference, and there were a couple thousand advisors in the room. And if you can envision this with a big sound system and big pictures on the, being put up on the screen, I used 3 drummers, and I put up there's a drummer named Dave Garibaldi. And depending on what era you're from, he's the drummer from Tower of Power. And Tower of Power, brilliant band, and Dave Garibaldi is a brilliant drummer. And I put him up on this particular conference. I put the picture of him up, and we play some of his music, and you can hear the drumming featured. And I usually ask the audience, because it's a black and white picture, and Tower of Power is not necessarily a well-known band today. I say, okay, so who can name the band? And there's like one guy way back in the rafters who went, Tower of Power. And I went, awesome, one person out of 2,000. And then I said, so, and who can name the drummer? Same guy, Dave Garibaldi. I was like, whoa, man, if I'd had a prize, he would have won it. And then I used Neil Peart. Neil Peart is the great drummer from Rush, and everybody knows that, got him sort of playing the drums to the beginning of Tom Sawyer. And then again, just a classic rock, being a classic rock person, and most of our audiences of that era as well, I use John Bonham. And then the question is, would any of these bands have replaced, could you imagine a meeting, right? So there's a meeting, and the band members from Tower of Power or Rush or Led Zeppelin get together and say, here's what we should do. If we replace our drummer with a drum machine, we'll save a bunch of money, and we can split the profit fewer ways than if we have to cut the drummer in. And I can assure you, with great drummers, there was no such meeting. And the analogy is regardless of technology, if you're a great financial advisor, great at the human connection, great at using your technology tools, great at helping people achieve their goals and fulfilling their values, you will never go out of style. So yes, we may see a large percentage, and I got that statistic, by the way, 58%. That was from an article in Financial Advisor magazine. And I thought about that. Well, what is 58%? So the bottom 58% of the financial services industry get replaced by machines. So what's the lesson? Well, don't be in the bottom 58%, right? And if you are in the bottom 58%, you forgive me for being this direct, but tough shit for you. I mean, you're in the, it's like
extreme ownership.
60% is like the lowest D, right? So if you were giving grades, A work is the 90 to 100%, B work is 80 to 89%, C work is 70 to 79%. So at the very least, you got to be an A player. And well, in this case, you really just have to be a D player. The machines are only going to replace really crappy financial advisors. And why shouldn't they? Wouldn't that be great for the consumer? If we're really advocates for the consumer, I'm an advocate for financial advisors, but it's client first, it's advisors second, and then, the products, they're important, but they would be third, right? So if we always put the client first, if we're truly client-centered, then what we hope is technology will raise the level of client experience and help advisors be successful.
Bill, one of the things you mentioned is when you talk about those drummers and John Bonham in particular, even Neil Peart, they are the soul of the band, of the music. And the financial advisor is the soul of the money relationship or the money life of the client. And I tried to draw the line even further, and it gets a little thin, but the external wholesaler that goes and meets with the financial advisor and their clients in the field, they can arguably be called the soul of that particular product company, because
I couldn't agree with you more. There's that. They are the human connection. Otherwise the product manufacturers would just say, well, here are our products. Go to our website. Here are the features and benefits of our products. And they've tried that. I've watched this happen. I've watched I've watched some wholesaler forces contract and market share drops significantly, right? Because it's expensive. I mean, I get that. It's expensive to put a group of humans out there, but I think it's a great illustration that you're using, Mike, that they are the soul, they're the emotional connection. So in a world where the products are basically commodities, what causes a financial advisor to prefer one product over another? So if two products are relatively equal, and it's harder and harder to have, I say that a lot about financial advisors as well. Well, because I get that. Well, how do you differentiate yourself as a financial advisor? Well, be really good. That's how you differentiate yourself, because most financial advisors choose to not be. The same as a wholesaler. Be really good. How do you add value? How do you create the emotional connection? How do you actually help the financial advisor be more successful? Because your product is probably a commodity. And if you do invent something unique, it'll be a commodity in 6 months. Because if it's unique and good, you'll have competition very, very quickly. So I like your point about bringing the soul to the relationship. And the drum machine has no soul, and the robo-advisor has no soul. So I got asked that question at a conference called Exponential Finance, which is hosted by the Singularity University. And there were mostly executives in this at this conference. And I was on a panel with Rick Edelman and a couple of other sort of distinguished experts. And there were maybe 10% advisors in the room. And one gentleman raised his hand and said, well, do you see a future? This was 3 years ago. Do you see a future for human financial advisors? And well, it may get to the point as technology gets better and better that having a human financial advisor is just a choice. So imagine if technology, I'm sort of imagining virtual reality goggles, and you could create a technology interface that was very complete, and you could have a human interface. It may be just a preference, almost like a brand preference. Some humans like to work with humans, and other humans like to work with machines. So you have to be really good to be able to get that preference. Again, whether you're a leader or a wholesaler or an advisor, you got to bring that soul to it. So
it comes full circle too, because you can figure out, you can YouTube video how to do anything, even dentistry if you wanted to. But humans don't want that. Humans want another human who is skilled in this thing to tell them what to do. I read a story or watched you talk about a story when you were doing your qualifier for Ironman, and you got to the run part of it, and you hobbled along and finished the race, and then you talked to your friend who's a champion triathlete and an Ironman, and the guy said one word, said magnesium. That you can't get that from a robot. The sense of knowing because they've done it, kind of a thing, that experiential trust that's out there. So I agree that there is a future both for wholesaling and for financial advisors. I think that the robots and all of these things, they make good servants, not good masters.
Yeah, I think the best wholesaler, the best financial advisor, the best leader, they're effectively using their technology tools. When I was a rookie financial advisor, financial planning, you'd have to have the meeting with the prospect. They say, yep, we'd like to do financial planning. And then we would gather all the information. I live in San Diego, California. I work for a big firm in La Jolla, California. And we would put in an envelope all the documents and data to New York. And then about 10 days to 2 weeks later, we would get a leather binder, right? A hard cover embossed with the client's name on it. And that was the financial plan. And so you think about that today with, eMoney and Money Guide Pro, and you could name a dozen fantastic financial planning softwares. It's now more of an ongoing process. So the advisors who use the technology are better serving the clients. The wholesalers who use the technology are better serving the clients. Leaders, you hear that all the time. If you want to recruit an advisor from one firm to your firm, what's your technology stack, right? So what tools do you have, right? So that is hugely important, but it doesn't eliminate the human.
I have a question for you, and this is all in the same swimming pool of ideas. But one of the concepts that you bring up is this concept of asset glasses, and that financial advisors look at clients, and I'll tell you, wholesalers look at financial advisors through what you call asset glasses. And then you kind of give us the golden rule: relationships are about people, not money. Do you see that out there with wholesalers that you're familiar with, or what's the status of that as far as the asset classes go?
Sure, I think it's human nature. I think it's human nature to say, well, I see you for your production, not for who you are as a person who I can help achieve your goals. So it's sort of a catch-22. You want to have, if you're a wholesaler, you want to get the bigger producers to do business with you, because one relationship requires the same amount of effort as another relationship. But if you're working with a big producer, then the payoff is bigger, right? But none of us want to be looked at like a number, right? We all want to be looked at as humans. And so on the one hand, when I do wholesaler training, I think the mistake that most wholesalers make, and I've been helping wholesalers with this for 25 plus years, is I think they look at it as a territory to cover. And I think that's a mistake. What I recommend wholesalers do is I say, so look, you have a number that your company expects you to deliver. So you have some net asset growth or amount of annuity business or insurance business to bring in. And if you hit that number or exceed that number, your company's happy. And if you miss that number, your company's not happy. They're not looking for you to be like a PR. You're not in public relations. Your job isn't to travel around your territory and be sort of a walking spokesperson or billboard. Your job is to bring in business. And so a classic example of this, I was working with a wholesaler team out of New York, and one of the gentlemen, his first name is Mike, obviously saying his name is yours, and Mike, part of his territory was Boston. But he had New England was his territory, but one city in New England is Boston. And so I said, well, role play this with me. I said, so how much business do you have to bring in? He happened to work for a mutual fund company, and he told me what the number was. And I said, so let's see how little travel you could do to exceed that number. And we narrowed it down. If you know the city of Boston, I said, so where do you live? He said, well, I live in Boston. All right, so let's just start there. I want you to imagine, even though your territory is much bigger, I want you to imagine you're going to exceed your number and you can't leave Boston. So let's just sort of humor me and let's walk through this exercise. And the president of his company was in the room as we did this.
Oh, geez.
The president of his company was named David. So, and I know some wholesalers have said to me, but Bill, they want me to cover the territory. I said, I'm telling you, they want you to bring in the business, right? That's what they want. And then wholesalers say, but if I don't cover the territory, they'll cut my territory. They'll put somebody else in the cities I'm not going to. So, well, if you're bringing in all the business, which is how you get paid, why would you care if they hire somebody to cover Hartford because you're crushing it in Boston? And so just walk you through this analogy and just think about this and how this applies to your business as a wholesaler watching this. So not only do we narrow it down to Boston, but we narrowed it down to 3 high-rise buildings in the back bay of Boston. And he named the companies that are in those buildings. So in each building, there were multiple companies. You can imagine a big, 25 or 30 or 40 or 50-story building. So he narrowed it down to like 15 offices with some key advisors, and he could just work those 3 buildings. And we just it took us 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes, to build a strategic plan of how he would exceed his production number. And I looked at the president of the company named David, who hired me for a lot more wholesaler training after that. And I said, well, David, let me ask you, you're the boss. I mean, if I'm off track here, would you be okay with this? Are you sitting there cringing saying, I wish Bachrach wasn't teaching Mike this idea? And he said, this is awesome. He said, exactly, it's about production, right? So we're not paying people to travel. And I said, well, on the subject of travel, what's your travel budget? And he said $70,000 a year. So he's got a production target, and it was more than just a travel budget. I'll call it the travel schmooze budget. So he had $70,000 that he could, spend on travel, dinners, taking advisors to breakfast, lunch, whatever. At the time, of course, I don't know how popular this is now, but taking me to a hockey game or a ball game of some kind. And I said, so right now you spread that $70,000 around the whole territory. I said, so let me ask you this. How much does an advisor benefit when you spend some of that $70,000 on an airplane ticket? Right? Exactly. So, well, they don't get any benefit from that. I said, so I want you to imagine if you spent your $70,000 on just those advisors in those 3 buildings. Right? So while the other wholesalers are covering a big geography, you're going to own this territory. Anyway, the bottom line was it was very clear, and he applied that strategy. He was a relatively new wholesaler. He applied that strategy, and within about 18 months, he was the top wholesaler in his organization. The sort of the punchline or the entertaining part of this is, why was he the only one who did that?
Because that's the way we always do it, right?
So it's funny, everybody in the room, he was my role play partner.
Wow.
So the idea was every wholesaler in the room could have done that. Every other wholesaler decided to, again, status quo. Well, this is how I've always done it. I've got to travel around and cover the territory. I got a phone call over here, so I got to drive 100 miles and go see this potential piece of business. So then the question is, how do you cover the geography? My recommendation is cover geography with your internal wholesaler by phone and meetings like this, and have your external person really go deep on key relationships.
Yeah, that's that 20%, like Duncan McPherson talks about the 80-20 rule.
Right.
What you just described as a 20%er kind of a strategy, Bill.
Right, which anybody could be in. I mean, that's choice. So it's a conscious decision. Being a great communicator is a choice. Being focused is a choice. Mastering client or advisor acquisition is a choice. It's simply a choice. And what's always disappointing, I think, for people like you and me who tend to be achievers and overachievers and want to inspire other people to be achievers and overachievers, is that there's sort of this inertia, and there's this tendency to, well, this is how it's always been done. Well, yeah, but what percentage of wholesalers exceed their production targets? So you don't want to be in this big group, you want to be in this little group. So if you want to be in this group, you have to do what this group does.
Yeah, words of wisdom. As you're talking, I'm thinking, like, this is the same Bill Bachrach that I was introduced to almost 2 decades ago. So I know that your firm has evolved. Your message is very succinct and very poignant, like it always has been. But can you talk to us about how you are using, how Bachrach and Associates is using virtual technology, online technology, to help more financial advisors and wholesalers and leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, over the years, as my business has evolved, I've tended to work with a smaller and smaller number of advisors at a much deeper level. And so we have a very expensive and intensive training and coaching program called the Committed Advisor Mastermind Program. People ask, well, committed to what? Well, it's committed to living your ideal life by building an ideal business with ideal clients. And it's very expensive. I mean, it's $5,000 a month. You have to make a 4-year commitment. And I love that kind of a relationship, deep relationship. I mentioned earlier, I listen to their recordings of their client meetings with their prospects. We meet every quarter in San Diego for 6 full days per quarter, very intense. What is missing in that, though, is I've always had this mission to transform the financial services industry from salespeople to trusted advisors. And so on the one hand, that's the mission. On the other hand, I was actually working with fewer and fewer advisors. So I would give a keynote talk, maybe do a webinar, and advisors would say, well, Bill, how do we work with you? So 3 years ago, our entry-level program was $9,500 as a stepping stone to potentially being invited, which was hard to get an invitation, to get into the $250,000 program. And then along came, this is technology, right? Along came artificial intelligence progressed, technology progressed, and the e-learning platforms progressed to the point where our kind of content, which is very script-oriented, interactive communication skills, could be effectively delivered through an online platform. So 2.5 years ago, we launched the Advisor Roadmap virtual training platform, which is at youradvisorroadmap.com. And if Mike said to me 10 years ago, hey, Bill, I'm going to predict your future. 10 years from now, you're going to put everything you know about client acquisition, client service, leadership, and time management, you're going to put it online and make it available to all advisors around the world for $900. I would have said, yeah, awesome, Mike, you are smoking crack, man. I don't know how late you stayed out last night, but you had some kind of a hallucination, and yet here we are. 2.5 years ago, we launched exactly that. And it's beautiful because you'll probably remember, and maybe some of the wholesalers and advising watching will remember, I give a talk, and in the back of the room, you could buy a box of training materials. If you liked my message and it resonated with you, for $500, you could buy what we affectionately call Bill in a Box. And it had a copy of my book and a couple of video cassettes or DVDs, depending on the era, 6 audio cassettes or CDs, a package of a tool called the Financial Roadmap, but it was static. It was static. And now the virtual training platform is enormously interactive. And so I'm more excited than I've ever been about the mission of actually being able to help anyone who wants to transform themselves to a trusted advisor, build an ideal business, and create their ideal life. And we've made it such, and I don't want to sound like it's too much of an infomercial, but it's $900. That's a fraction of the value of even a bad client. Your worst client, you made more than $900 with. So we tried to make it accessible. It's enough money that it requires a little commitment, but cheap enough that, if you can't find $900, I don't think there's anything anybody can do to help you.
Well, I mentioned to you earlier before we started recording that consuming some of just your free content on the internet, just watching the kind of the mojo that you have with the financial, it makes me want to be a financial advisor.
Mm-hmm.
The value that we can provide to the investor, the fulfillment that we can have in our lives. I don't know if it could be, charity work is the only thing that I could think that would be comparable to that. So yeah, for $900 for someone to do it, I can't wait for the wholesaler version to come out. And I also would say that you could probably cross-train it pretty simply. The concepts are still the same. Very, very, very similar. In fact, I use WHOLESALERS, what's important about, and I say blank to you all the time. And I use it to try to understand the language that the advisor uses. Are they a pride person? Are they a fear person based on their answers? Can you touch on kind of maybe the 2019 version of WHOLESALERS and what's changed, or maybe what's not ever going to change?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. In fact, I think the reason why, remember when I first got asked to do wholesaler training, my first thought was, well, I really train financial advisors. So, and then the reason it was easy for me to transition over and do wholesaler training is we're basically in the same business, right? So the distinction is, I have to work with financial advisors, so they pay me because they want to pay me and our company for some training. So whether it was buying our static training materials in the old days, coming to one of our workshops, now buying the virtual training platform, joining a high-level training, we're really in the same business. We just get compensated differently, right? So I get paid directly, and you as a wholesaler get paid through them using your products and services, and you get a percentage of the business that they bring in, get a salary and a bonus based on production, right? So we're really in the same business. Mm-hmm. So what we do is, you're asking about the what's important question. And so what we do is, in the book, High Trust Leadership, I specifically talked about, because it's the same for managers. So managers, recruiters, it's the same business. You have to build a relationship with an advisor So they want to work with you to help them be more successful. And I'm actually very pleased to see this. I don't know how many hundreds of wholesalers I put this message to. I said, what value do you really bring? It can't just be the product. And to wholesalers' credit, over the last 20, 25 years, you see a lot more value being delivered. Wholesalers have gotten better at their presentation skills. And so when they buy a session, you can sponsor somebody like me, but I also see wholesalers who I think are very good communicators really delivering value. And so the what's important question is particularly effective in a one-on-one situation. And so the context is what's important about success to you. So an advisor, it's what's important about money to you. With a wholesaler or a leader, it's what's important about success to you. And then you build on that. So there's a connection between, you've got their values. Values are the emotional why that someone does what they do, right? That's what's important. We'll bring them up what we call the values staircase. And then you have a conversation about their goals. So values are the emotional why, and goals are the tangible what, right? So I do this probably 5 times a week with financial advisors. What's important to them? What are their goals? And then you benchmark their current reality. We actually have a tool called the Success Roadmap. So there's a financial roadmap, which is between advisors and clients, and between wholesalers and advisors, it's the Success Roadmap. It takes about 35 to 45 minutes to complete, but now you can look at the advisor and say, all right, so let's talk about how working with us is going to help you bridge the gap between where you are now and where you want to be. And I've got it broken down into about 15 success metrics. So we ask very personal questions immediately. So first of all, what's important to you? Build their values hierarchy. What are your goals, particularly like financial independence and whatever their personal goals are. And they have the same kind of goals as clients do, right? They want to be financially independent. They want to send their kids to college. They want to go on nice vacations. They want to buy perhaps a vacation home. And then what do they have to do that? Well, most of them have to increase their income. They have to increase their net worth. They want to have more ideal clients. So we bridge the gap, and it's not only business success metrics, but it's quality of life success metrics. They want to ski more, surf more, play the drums more, play more golf, have more time, more date nights, whatever it is. So you create this visual roadmap, and then it's your job, whatever your product or service is, to say, well, here's how we can help you get from where you are now to where you want to be so you can achieve your goals for the reasons that are important to you. So that's a little bit of an explanation of that process. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, it does. In fact, I've been using this to develop my relationships over the last 2 decades as a wholesaler, and the distinction is direct. So if you're teaching a financial advisor how to do this through the financial planning process with their clients, that's a direct connection. And as a wholesaler, it takes a little bit of art because it's an indirect connection. And sometimes the biggest challenge is that the product isn't necessarily worthy of that deep of a relationship that I've built based on these extra valuable things. So part of the due diligence as a wholesaler is to make sure that you are representing a product that can contribute to that relationship. And it makes it much easier, almost seamless if I do that.
Yeah, or you have some other kind of assets. So this isn't just a pitch for the work that I do. We have companies who say, well, here's what we're going to do. Based on, in fact, I had a meeting this morning with somebody who represents multiple FMOs who said, Bill, this is what we want to do. Right? We want to be able to recommend to the advisors that we work with. We're developing a list of resources to help them be successful. So as we are discovering these things about the advisors who do business with us, we want to be able to direct them. So he wants to set up, and we have a system for this, we're setting up for him a pathway where he gets the credit for introducing advisors to our virtual training platform. So he may or may not subsidize it. That's something that they're considering, but even if they don't subsidize it, and you could do the same thing. You talked about Duncan McPherson. You could say, well, who are the credible experts at helping financial advisors be successful? And then you could say, all right, well, based on what we've talked about, here's where I think you should go to be successful, and here are things that we can do to help you be successful. And so whether you get, whether you personally deliver it or not. And so you and I were talking earlier, and we were talking about somebody that you know, but who's also a personal friend of mine. If I make the introduction to Captain Charlie Plum and he appears on your podcast, he'll do a great job. To some degree, I get the credit because I made the introduction, right? Because it wouldn't have happened. So if you as a wholesaler make the connection to help an advisor be successful, it's sort of like the person who introduced you to your wife, assuming your marriage was successful. You have you feel like, hey, I'm indebted to you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have met, my wife or my husband. And so there's a the needle moves in the right direction when you make introductions that help somebody achieve their goals. So it isn't just what you do, it's the other things. If you can be a resource to advisors, it has an impact. And if you're a leader watching this, I would just take a moment. I mean, the research is stunning. I mean, this is almost cliche. People don't quit their company, they quit their boss. And there was a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, the magazine, and I don't think I'm going to get the percentage right, but it was enormously high. My memory, it was something like 65% of employees would forego a raise to see their boss fired. Right?
Think about that.
I mean, it's just stunning. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's the CEO of a medium-sized broker-dealer, and I just asked him very directly the question. He said, man, I'm curious, do you guys keep track of the entire cost of recruiting a new advisor? And without missing a beat, he said $350,000. And I said, and I didn't even get my next question out, and he anticipated, and he said, and they stay on average 5 years. So it cost us $350,000. That's the cost of customer acquisition. Cost of advisor acquisition is $350,000 for one advisor who stays 5 years. Right? So here's a question. What if they stayed 6 years?
6 years, yeah.
What if they stayed 7 years? What if one of your advisors wasn't recruitable? Right, so because if it costs $350,000 to bring a new advisor on, what's the cost if you lose that advisor after 3 years instead of 5 years? What if they stay 7 years or 10 years? And it's all about that. Largely it's about the emotional connection and the relationship that people feel. And with all due respect to the leaders in the financial services industry, you don't hear that many favorable things from advisors about their company or about their leadership. Oftentimes you find advisors stay where they are because it's a hassle to leave.
It's true.
Right? And that shouldn't be your retention strategy. We retain advisors because we know it sucks to leave.
Yeah. When you develop those, really nests or webs of value, that's when the advisor doesn't leave. And I do see it out there where an advisor they won't even talk about it, but another broker dealer. Sure, there's some things that another broker dealer might do better, but the value, almost this intrinsic or even intangible value that they've received over the years from the principals at that broker dealer, that they make a real relationship. It's not just a commodity. It's not just a business card holder. I could talk to you forever. In fact, I've got 7 pages of notes here I wanted to ask you, Bill, but we do have to kind of turn the corner on this. The last concept I want to ask you about, though, was very impressive, and it kind of goes back to the beginning. And, you said the cornerstone, to building trust is to do this magnificently crafty and tricky thing, which is just to tell the truth. Just tell the truth. And it's amazing as an adult, as a professional, that's like the thing that we have to beat, our peers on the head with, is to tell the truth. But so I looked a little further into it, and this is what I came up with that you'd said, is that the trusted advisors or trusted wholesalers, yes, they always tell the truth, but it's not just that simple. They tell the truth even when it means risking the relationship. And you have a terrific question, Bill. This is what you say. You ask the question of them. You say to them, can I have permission to really speak freely and tell you the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know you're a wordsmith. That is terrific language there. Could a wholesaler do the same thing with a financial advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. I did it yesterday. I have one of the services that we offer is something called a power session. So if a financial advisor, I do the same thing with wholesalers, but mostly I do this with financial advisors. If they want like 90 minutes of my time, it's a power session. We do it on a Zoom meeting like this. We record it. They can see my screen. I actually do exactly what I was just talking about. We build their success roadmap, and then we pivot into advice. All right. So what are your opportunities? What are your obstacles? What exactly do you need to do to build the business you really want? And typically what they really want is they want to have a finite number of ideal clients, and they want to have each of those clients paying them some amount of recurring revenue. So it's the same with wholesalers, right? You want your core of top advisors doing most or all of their business with you so that you're consistently generating a number that exceeds what the company requires you to do to be successful. And this is a very nice woman. She happens to be from Australia. She lives in Canberra, Australia, which is the capital of Australia. And she'd come to my workshop about 4 years ago and popped up on our virtual training platform, opted in for a power session. I mean, really nice person. And we got sort of a little deeper into the advice, and there was a place where she was stuck. And I did exactly what you just said. I said, can I really speak completely freely and candidly and give you some, advice that say something that may be difficult to hear? And she took a deep breath. I could hear her kind of go, and she said, sure. And I asked her first, I said, so how long have you been in the business? And she said, 20 years. I said, with all due respect, and I come from a place where I really care about helping you be successful. After 20 years, the reason you're still making as little money as you're making is because of that particular limiting belief. And those are moments. If you think about your most important people in your life, your mentors, your coaches, maybe your parents, maybe a boss or a leader that you had who was really good, you don't have these favorable memories of them because they kissed your ass and made you feel good about yourself, even when you were not making things happen.
So
right? It's somebody who's willing to take a risk and step in and say, look, you're smarter than this, you're more talented than this, you're stuck because you need a breakthrough. One of the things I've discovered, for example, if you watch one of our webinars or you look at the marketing, I talk very specifically, this is how we help new advisors, this is how we help successful veterans, and this is how we help, and I call them the mediocre middle. And I call the mediocre middle any advisor who's between $200,000 and $500,000 a year of production. There are companies where their top advisor is doing what I would call the mediocre middle. And I remember when I first put that out there, and I don't say it, oh, you're in the mediocre middle. I just describe it very matter-of-factly. And I remember there were some people who said to me, I think you're going to offend that group of people. And we found exactly the opposite. They're not offended at all. They say things like, yeah, I'm in that mediocre middle and I want to break out of it. And so they know that 200 to 500,000, nobody gets into this business and says, I want to do 200 to 500,000. And it's frustrating for people who are in the mediocre middle to watch people do 750 or $1 million or 2 million who are no smarter than them. It's frustrating. Nobody really wants to be in the mediocre middle, but the truth is that's what it is. So I think there's a lot of power in sometimes in one-on-one you ask permission. In that case, I don't ask permission. I just put it out there. I broadcast. If you're in a newer advisor, here's how to skip the mediocre middle and go straight to the top. If you're stuck in the mediocre middle, here's how to break out and be in this group. And if you're a top advisor, here's how to build the business you always really wanted. And I call it finishing strong. All right, so we put that out there, and we not only did we not get a negative response, we got a favorable response telling that truth. So, yep, you have to risk the relationship. And I think you might also be thinking about, you smile when you tell one of those truths. And I don't know if you want me to cover that as well, but I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, you have that remarkable smile. I've seen it live, and it really does add a little bit of a panache to it. So go ahead, Bill. When you deliver this tough information, you trained me and you trained others to deliver it with a smile. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It really is more important than the smile, though, is are you coming from a place of caring? So I didn't just walk in the room and after 30 seconds, tell you something that's hard to hear. I listened. You told me what's important to you. You told me what your goals are. You told me where you are now and where you want to be. Right? You talked about your opportunities. You talked about your obstacles. So it's not like you walk through the door and say, I looked at your production and you suck. It's so you really, and I think people feel that. They feel if you really care about helping them be successful, they feel that. But the point is, to the smile part is, when you tell somebody a truth like this, don't be mean about it, just smile. And the joke that I have about that I often use on the platform is, if you're a financial advisor, you might have to tell a client, I've looked at your financial situation and there's not a chance in hell you'll achieve any of these goals. Right? I've met your children. I have no idea why you'd want to help them with their future. Right? So it's okay to have a little fun with it, but the point is that you tell the truth even if it means risking the relationship. The irony is, you may be afraid you're going to risk the relationship, but you don't risk the relationship. It actually moves the needle on the trust dial in the right direction because you cared enough to get to the heart of the matter. So it may feel like you're risking the relationship, but you're not actually risking the relationship at all.
Well, you've often said that if comfort is your goal, then success is not in your future. So that risk, that little bit of uncomfortableness, is truly what it takes to be successful. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate what you're doing. Can you talk about maybe the next 20 years of Bachrach and Associates, and where does your vision see your company and yourself going in the next 20 years?
Well, I think our most important vision is we expect to continue to be one of the leaders on helping financial advisors and wholesalers and leaders be effective. So we're passionate about the client. We believe in comprehensive financial planning. We believe that consumers are better off, at least currently, if they have a human interface. I don't know if I'll ever get to the point where I look at some technology and go, that technology is as good as technology, technology that's embraced by a human to help the client. So we're here to help human advisors be more successful and compete. And I had an advisor probably 20 years ago, Mike, and his first name was Frank. And I was having a conversation with Frank. His company I spoke at all their meetings, and we did a lot of consulting to help them integrate our concepts into their whole training program. And I had known Frank pretty well, but what I didn't know about him is that he, previously to being a financial advisor, was a marriage and family counselor. And it made a lot of sense because Frank was wonderfully compassionate. He was excellent at asking the questions. He was a really good listener. He had great empathy, sort of all those important people and communication skills that we all strive to develop to be more successful and effective. And I said, wow, I didn't know that about you. Explains a lot. I understand why you're such a successful financial advisor, having that background. I'm just curious, how did you go from being a marriage and family therapist and counselor to being a financial advisor? And he said, well, Bill, it's not so much how I did it, it's why I did it. He said, so when I was a marriage and family counselor, I found that most of the conflict in the relationship had to do with money. He said, so I figured instead of helping people after they had money conflict, if I became their financial advisor, I could help prevent money conflict. And so the work that we do is really important. We're not selling lawnmowers, we're not selling widgets, we're not selling, Coca-Cola or sugared water. And the work we do is really important. So I appreciate that. We're not the Red Cross or the United Way or the American Cancer Society, but the work we do is really important. So I just hope to continue to empower leaders and wholesalers and financial advisors to help consumers make smart financial choices, get their financial house in order so that they can achieve their goals for the reasons that are important to them.
Yeah, well, wish you the utmost success in doing that. I'd like to shift gears here and ask you my two signature questions, Bill. And I ask these of all of the guests. So you've got some competition, Jeffrey Gittimer and Duncan McPherson and a few other guys, Super Coach Michael Burt. They've all answered these questions. They're individual, so there's no wrong answer, but it's going to be interesting to hear your answers. So here we go. Bill, imagine you pick up the telephone, you say hello, and on the other end of the telephone, there is 27-year-old Billy Bachrach. What advice would you give to your younger 27-year-old self today?
Be more humble. Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty direct communicator today. Maybe it helped me when I was in my 20s. I sort of look back on it with a catch-22. I think you needed to be confident, and I had decided when I was 27 that I would figure out how to steal or rescue clients from top financial advisors, but I'd probably be a little bit mellower. I'd probably be a little bit humbler. My wife met me when I was in my early 30s, and it's one of her favorite stories to tell. But she did not like me at all. I mean, she thought I was just an arrogant, you know what. So fortunately, and I didn't know this, ironically, I asked her out, not knowing that in the back of her mind, she thought, this guy is just, an arrogant, you know what. And fortunately, she had some friends who had a different experience with me. And so I had been helping them, I'd been mentoring them. And so apparently there were sort of two extremes to Bill. On the one hand, I could be this really caring, helpful guy. On the other hand, I could come across like sort of an arrogant jerk. And, fortunately, I remember asking my wife, I said, well, why did you even go out with me? It was many dates before she said, you're not as big of a dickhead as I thought you were.
That's awesome.
So, I think I would, if I could do it over again, I would hope that I could be also caring and helpful and confident and determined to be successful. And honestly, in hindsight, I think I just had a chip on my shoulder. So I don't come from money. I was not financially successful. And so there was a period of my life where I was sort of doing the Tommy Hopkins things, right? I was faking it till I was making it. And I think I was trying to overcompensate. And maybe I didn't need to do that. So I could have maybe been a little more humble.
Those are words of wisdom. You're showing your age there, sir, but not in biological, but in wisdom there.
Yeah, I get it.
Second question. This is a little bit more fun. If you could choose any superpower, which one would you choose to have, and what would you do with it?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a formal list of superpowers, but if I could wave a magic wand, I would love more than anything else to wave a magic wand. And we could go for something massively influential, so world peace or something like that. Why can't we all get along? I'm not going to go there. But if I could wave a magic wand, I would want for sort of all human beings, and we'll take this to our industry, to instantly blow up their limiting beliefs. And I think if we could all blow up our limiting beliefs, that I hear these limiting beliefs all the time. So, well, I don't know how to find more financially successful people, or I'm young in the business, I'm new in the business, I'm too old in the business to make that transition. What I would love to see is those limiting beliefs blown up. And I think what would happen is that the whole industry would elevate. I'd love to see the whole industry elevate and really, as just a matter of absolute practice, embrace comprehensive financial planning. Because I hear this all the time. I've got to be, well, you have to enter the business by first learning to sell this particular product. Or you have to enter the business. I'm coaching a 22-year-old young lady who doesn't have these limiting beliefs. And so she has a job where she gets paid $50,000 a year, and that's how she pays her bills straight out of college. She's building a financial services business where her fee is $42,000 a year. So she doesn't have her first client yet, but we're filling her pipeline with financially successful people who can afford to pay her $42,000 a year of recurring revenue. And so imagine if we didn't have these limiting beliefs about business and about life, if we should have unleashed all of our powers to accomplish what we're capable of. That's sort of the magic wand I would wave. So
That's
again,
awesome.
I don't know if that's a superpower, but if I could do that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, we're gonna call you the limiting belief eraser man, and get rid of those. But no, that's very insightful, and it tells us about you too. So it tells us about where your heart is and where your efforts are, and appreciate that. I'm sure that Ann appreciates it too. So she's done well. She's done well with you.
Well, if anybody knows my wife Ann, they know that I definitely married up, which I think should be everyone's goal. Should be married up.
That's good. That is good. Her charity was started earlier in her life, obviously. Hey, before we wrap though, I would like to really just, tell you thanks. You've actually been an inspiration to me back when I was a fledgling financial advisor at IDS and at American Express Financial Advisors. And you had an impact on everyone in the office, everyone that I had talked to for years. I've used your strategies millions of times, and even with personal relationships to figure out what is important about whatever it might be, what's important about date night to you, what's important about where the kids go to school to you, to really kind of communicate. It's been terrific. So on behalf of the world, I believe, especially the financial services world, I can tell you that we all say thank you for that. We all appreciate you, Bill, and for your work and with your online platform. Definitely wish you much fortune and success, both now and in the future. And as I say on the Awesome Wholesaler Experience, it's about the journey, and I wish you well on yours. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Wholesalers, thanks for listening. And if you'd like to support the show, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And like our infamous friend, Jeffrey Gittimer said, share it. Go ahead, share it with both of your friends. Seriously, though, if you do enjoy the show, I do appreciate any kind of rating, reviewing, and go ahead and leave a comment. So with that, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the show, and thanks for being awesome. Good night, everybody.